We're bringing in Rick Perlstein. You're a prominent historian of the conservative movement in the United States, and you're joining us from Chicago, Illinois. It's a pleasure to speak to you today. Donald Trump is often described as unprecedented. In fact, I use that word at the top of the show. His political trajectory, his policies, his style of governance, all of it. Now, you're a historian. Are Donald Trump and Trumpism as unusual as all the commentary suggests?
Well, everything he does and says within the American context, has precedent, but that doesn't mean there's anyone like Donald Trump in the American past. I mean, on the international stage, you can find precedents, but you have to go back, to the era before steam engines, when, in the early 19th century, after the Napoleonic Wars, the wars in Europe grew so dangerous and deadly that they created the concert of Europe to create some system so nations could compete and create great power competition without descending into war. And of course, that was, sometimes succeeded and sometimes failed. But, there was a reset of that, obviously, after the disasters of World War II. And what we see now is Trump kind of going back to an era in which a small group of empires, kind of in this case, America, China, and Russia, run by charismatic leaders, get together and kind of divide the world between themselves, almost like, the characters in The Godfather in Cuba, the movie, who have a cake the shape of Cuba and, slice it up and each one gets a slice. So really, we're going back to the dark ages of diplomacy.
You use the word empire. Now, something that I've been reading and hearing more than once has been a sort of broad explanation about the decline of the American quote unquote empire. And we might not all realize it, but that really is the moment where we are. And that's kind of why Donald Trump became president. And that's why, his policies are winning, because this is, in that broad theory, that this is what empires do when they start to decline. They thrash about, essentially.
That's an interesting insight. I mean, after World War II, when America really bestrode the world economically like a colossus because there had been so much destruction everywhere else, we had about half the world's trade. And in the United States, the consequences of that, because of, smart policies and a strong democracy, were broadly shared prosperity. The average income of the average American family between 1945 and 1972 doubled, right? And that really started declining with the 1970s for all sorts of reasons. And this long, slow slide into something like America becoming one more nation among others has kind of caused a sort of cultural neurosis, right? Almost kind of like a sickness in which we thrash about for a strong man, but this strong man, only has promises to deliver and no real foundation behind it. And one of the most terrifying consequences of this, is precisely that Trump thinks he can, get together with the world's strongmen, Vladimir Putin most consequentially, whom he calls, a strong man who loves his country, and have their way with the rest of the world.
You wrote multiple books, among them Nixonland and Reaganland. If you ever end up writing Trumpland, what will that story be?
Well, unfortunately, the story might be one of the end of government for the people, of the people, by the people, which was the soaring promise offered by Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, the height of the Civil War. And that's a very terrifying prospect, because it's not just something that has consequences for the United States, but it has consequences for the entire world.
As viewers take in the news on a day-to-day basis, how do they separate the noise from what really matters? I mean, what are you looking at that you think is really consequential and substantive?
I think the most consequential thing, because it really conditions all the others, is the derangement derangement, of the internet, of the information environment. The way strongmen like Trump and Putin try to make it impossible to discern accurately the reality that's all around us. So to me, the most frightening figure in the Trump administration is not Stephen Miller, although he's very frightening, or Elon Musk, although he's also very frightening, but the spokesperson, Carolyn Leavitt, who really every day gives these press briefings that sound like something you'd hear in Nazi Germany, in which they designate an enemy that's, of unmitigated evil, that wants to destroy everything that's decent and true in life. And they're set against enemies who are like people like you and me. And, when that happens and when people buy that and they can't resist it because they think that it's in their own interests, even though it's going to swallow them up along with the rest of us, it's very hard to build a democracy back from that.
Historian Rick Perlstein, thank you very much for joining us on the Al Jazeera NewsHour.
Thanks.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.